I can say no. I can hear everything.
We
Okay,
can
check your mic, pal.
check.
I have audio here. I think you're good.
You think we're good?
Yeah, I would say go. Act like you know what you're doing.
Well, I'm going to wait because the video is in fact frozen again for us here. I think we may be completely buggered. No, I think we might be back. Can anybody hear me now? Anybody at all?
That looks better.
Yeah? We don't have anybody saying they can hear us though.
Yeah, I think you should be able to hear you now. I've got audio levels on you. Darren.
Okay, Kevin heard me. Can you hear Max?
All right, check. Can you hear me as well?
Can you hear Daren?
Check, check.
Can we hear Daren? Yes.
Can you hear me?
We
Oh,
can hear.
I can
All
hear
right.
you anyway.
Everybody
Fantastic.
can hear something. All right. There we go. So Aaron's not getting paid for tonight. Welcome everybody to
should he be
17
any
minutes
different than
past
us?
6. Exactly, 17 minutes past 6, and we are rolling. So if I ever say, we always start on time, you can go ahead and point to tonight and call me a liar. We are here with my father, Max Baines, and with Daren Owers, the very, very patient Daren Owers of Nugan Estate Wines in Australia. Good evening, Daren.
Good evening.
Or good morning for you, same difference.
Good.
Now, for those of you who were here in our first brief aborted video that didn't work, we were talking a little bit about, with my dad, how Andrew Hilton started and how incredibly important to the store's early days the Australian wine industry is and was. So we started back in 1985. I was about 3. You were just getting the store started, and it was a really different world then. Why don't you tell us about that?
It was very different. Our mandate as a store was to bring in products that the ALCB did not sell at the time. So we were encouraged to go out, search the world, find new suppliers, and legitimately it was very hard because we were one store in the middle of nowhere. But the country that really attracted my attention and that worked really, really well with our store was Australia. And over the years, we developed some great contacts. For example, we were the very first store in Alberta to import Wolf Blass wines, which, as you know, has become a household word in Alberta. We worked very, very well with the Hardy's Wine Group, a good friend of yours and mine now, Viv Thompson of Best Wines, have become very, very close friends, and now more recently Ben Glazer. So it was the Australian wines that really made our store what it is and differentiated us from the ALCB and all the other private wine stores in Alberta. So that's how we got going.
Okay, cool. So, I think, would it be fair to say that when you started then, everything was all about Europe and maybe a little bit of South America? Australia was really kind of new, undiscovered country. That was something that nobody was really working with here yet?
Correct. Lindemans was just introducing their Bin 65 Chardonnay, which is now a world leader right around the world. And Alberta was the test market for that wine. And so with Lindemans' interest in exporting to Alberta, that triggered a lot of the other wine companies in Australia to look at Alberta. And so when we put out feelers for small quantities of unique wines to be imported into Alberta, we got a lot of interest from the wineries over there and have made a lot of friends over the years.
Beautiful. So we've got a new friend with us tonight. This is Daren Owers of Nugan Estate's Wines. Now, we already started. We had a little bit of stress earlier, as you can imagine, so we are already into the Pinot Grigio here. Why don't you introduce the Pinot Grigio for us, Daren?
Can do. Do you mind if I just have a little bit of a chat about Nugan Estate first and then fly in, or are we running behind time?
By all means. Normally I would have asked you to do that, but I'm a bit off script at this point. I apologize.
Not a problem. It's been a stressful morning and a stressful evening for you. So, look, just briefly before we start on the Pinot Grigio, the Nugan Estate story spans around 80 years, 3 generations. In 1938, Alfredo and Annelise Nugan fled their home village of Alcira in Spain and then migrated to Australia. Pretty much by 1940, they'd actually moved to the town that I'm in now, which is called Griffith. That's on the it's in New South Wales, which is the east coast of Australia, and we're actually southwest New South Wales. So warm to hot climate, but we've got the Murrumbidgee River nearby, plenty of sun, so it's and some very good soil down here as well. So it's a perfect environment for horticulture and viticulture and cropping and that sort of thing. So. Initially, Alfredo started selling seasonal produce or fruit and vegetables, but it was quite a difficult period for them. So they had to supplement their income by working in one of the local wineries here. When they had enough money, they saved up to buy their first property, and they planted some grapes. And now there's a road called Nugan Road that's actually named in honour of the family, which is not far from Griffith. So Alfredo was a bit of a tinkerer. He created an automated carrot harvester and mechanised grading equipment. He actually supplied General MacArthur's troops in World War II with fruit and vegetables packaged in boxes, and from that led into export markets, or domestic and export markets. By 1965, Alfredo and Annelise retired, and then the current owner's father, Ken, took over the family business, and he moved into fruit juice and citrus and the juicing of that. So not long after Ken took over the business, he died suddenly of cancer, and Matthew's mother, Michelle, had to take over in the late 80s. Pretty much the worst possible time to take over. We had the recession in the 80s, and Michelle had to build the company pretty much from the ground up. She developed some premium products for the Japanese market, some cloudy apple juice, pear and carrot juice concentrate that we exported to Japan. And that's where I came in and first started with the business. So I started in the late 90s in the analytical laboratory. So I did all of the analytical work for all of those products and dealt directly with the Japanese, so both microbiological and chemical analysis. It was extremely stressful and very labour intensive. And I sort of thought, well, I'd studied food technology at the University of Western Sydney but decided perhaps this wasn't quite for me. I was working huge hours, and obviously the Japanese expected nothing but the best. So 7 days a week. I said, look, Michelle, I'm thinking about going back to university and studying something else. This is not what I thought it would be. So Michelle said, well, we've got vineyards. Go and study wine science. We'll put you through your degree. So I thought, sounds like a good deal. So I studied wine science via correspondence, and then took some leave to go on campus and do all of my practical work and the like. And in 1999, Michelle created a small winery. I worked alongside a couple of winemakers until the end of 2002, and then I was able to take over in 2003. So that's basically my story. As far as from where we've come to where we are now, Nugan Estate is now the 20th, so in the top 20 wine producers in Australia, and we're the 13th largest exporter of branded wine in Australia, just in that short period. So we export all around the world. Some of these wines, the dried grape Shiraz and the second pass Shiraz that we're tasting today, that was actually initially created for one of our major markets, Denmark. But I'll talk a little bit about that later. So
I've got a few things I want to circle around to in a minute here, but
sure.
I think we've kept people waiting long enough. Let's talk about the wine that's in our glasses, and about our bottle that's about half empty at this point. So
let's smash it out. This is my breakfast wine. So cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Cheers.
Okay. So we have the 2018 Annelise Pinot Grigio in our first glass today. I'm not sure if you can see a shot of it. I actually can't see anyone, but this is what we're drinking right now. What we're tasting right now. Annelise, obviously named after Annelise Nugan, the first of the Nugans to come to Australia. The Pinot Grigio itself is grown just down the road from the winery, so within 15 kilometres of the winery. So we've got warm, dry, sunny conditions. It's a very user-friendly place to grow grapes at Handwood. So for me, really, it's just a matter of getting out in the vineyard and tasting the fruit. I'm looking at ripeness, but I'm also looking at retaining acidity, so having those crunchy acids, that lemon, lime, but retaining fruit as well. So as discussed, it's a warmer climate area, so we have to have our canopies trellised accordingly. We actually have what's called a sprawled type canopy. It acts as it shades the fruit of sorts. So there is some dappled light that reaches the bunches, but we can have some pretty warm conditions out here. So it's pretty important to ensure that we don't have any issues with sunburn and cooked characters. So we want to retain that freshness. How am I going for detail? Am I rambling or?
Well, the problem is you took away my first question from you a little bit, because I was going to ask. I mean, one of the questions we had right away was to talk about the acidity on this. I mean, Pinot Grigio by its very nature isn't the world's highest acid grape variety, and then you're making it in a very warm climate region like Australia. You talked a little bit about canopy management, but what level of steps do you have to take to make a high acid, fresh tasting, bright Pinot Grigio like this in a part of the world that doesn't always want to allow you to do that?
Sure. So we make Pinot Grigio from several regions. I guess a lot of people think that Australia is a super hot climate, but one of our vineyards, it snows in there, and it's obviously a cooler climate vineyard, and it's a different style. This is from the warmer climate, so we picked the fruit a little bit earlier. As I said, canopy management is extremely important. Also, we'll need to give the fruit a little bit of a drink as well. So we've got drip irrigation just to keep like any plant, it needs irrigation, or it needs water. So we'll give the fruit just enough to keep bunches turgid, leaves vibrant and photosynthesizing. Also, as I said, you've got a little bit of that sort of shading effect. So all of those things in combination help us to achieve optimum flavour ripeness and retain acidity. So we conduct chemical analysis as well. We're doing pHs and acids. I'm tasting the fruit. I've been doing this for a long time. I know what it is that we're looking for, and once we reach a desirable flavour profile with the appropriate acid, I'll harvest. And I'll harvest at night as well. It's a mechanised harvest, so we literally harvest in the cool of the night. It's just a few kilometres down the road, the vineyard, so we'll process that fruit at night. Quickly, so crush, de-stem with whole berry, straight into a pneumatic bag press with a free run and pressings fraction. So it's all done within an hour or so of harvest. We're able to rip through that very quickly to maintain freshness and vibrancy and acidity, so we don't end up with those bruised, cooked characters that can occur.
Well, I'm going to get a little bit off track here. You'll notice I get on tangents a bit, but I'd be absolutely mad at myself if I didn't ask you. We are doing the Pinot Grigio tonight, but I think of you, at least from a white wine perspective, first and foremost as a Chardonnay winemaker, because we've carried, the Nugan third generation Chard. We've had the Cucathama. We've had the King's Chardonnay, the top end.
King Valley, and that's the high country.
And then, funnily enough, we actually, a very long time ago, used to sell the Wally's Hut Chardonnay as well. So I think we've carried just about every Chardonnay you've ever exported, and I've really quite enjoyed all of your Chardonnays. Do you want to talk about a little bit about that? Because forgive me for saying so, but I think of you as more of a Chardonnay winemaker than anything else, because I've liked all of your Chardonnays.
I have a few strings to my bow. As far as production's concerned, I make Pinot Grigio, Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, Verdelho, a dessert wine as well, Botrytis Semillon. I'm making.
I had that in the store, yeah.
Yeah, rosés as well. There's other varietals as well. You're fortunate enough to get a cross section of what I make, but we make a myriad of wines. As far as style and what I was achieving, Chardonnay is pretty much. I mean, yes, I'm looking to retain freshness and brightness, but winemaking is very different. With the Chardonnay making, I actually like to incorporate or retain, in fact, some solids in the wine. So I'll give a little bit of skin contact for texture. I'll leave a little bit of solids in the ferment. So we've got, richer, more textural wines. I'm still picking on the earlier end of the ripeness spectrum to retain acidity and brightness for the wines that are harvested in this area. Cool ferment. We'll drain some off into barrels. There could be some barrel stave treatment in tanks. Then there'll just be some unoaked stainless components as well. There's a lot more work involved in making Chardonnay than there is the Pinot Grigio, in my opinion. A lot of work with layers and then compiling those layers together to get a final wine. Whereas the Pinot Grigio, there isn't really anywhere to hide. You have to pick it at the right time. You have to have a nice cool ferment with an aromatic yeast. We give it some time on yeast lees just to build a little bit more mouthfeel and freshness. But it is what it is. So if we have a bad season with possibly disease or sunburn or the like, it's very difficult to produce a crisp, clean Pinot Grigio such as this. Stop. Let's smash it up. Okay, so the Alfredo wines, and as I said, I'm not sure if you guys can see, but we're talking about this wine now. We've got the 2017 second pass. The thought behind this initially was we do a fair bit of work into Denmark. We actually we bottle in Copenhagen, so I go back and forth there a little bit. Italian.
I want to know more about that. That's fascinating.
Okay. So I guess we'd probably we'd have to be in the top 4 imported Australian wines into Denmark. We've had a long relationship with Gobivin over there, but Italian wines and wine styles are very popular in Denmark, and they have been for some time. So we're asked by our customer to create an Amarone style and a Ripasso style wine with an Australian spin. Being a laboratory technician and a scientist and someone who loves experimentation, fantastic. Thank you for the challenge. So rather than using the Rondinella and the Corvina, I thought, well, what's more Australian than using Shiraz in an Amarone style wine? So we created the Alfredo dried grape Shiraz and the second pass Shiraz, loosely using Amarone and the I guess the methods of Valpolicella to create what we have in the bottle today. So,
do you want to describe the Appassimento method, or do you want me to run folks through it? Which would you prefer?
Am I speaking too much?
No. I'm trying to get a little bit of back and forth here.
Yeah, sure. Look, over to you, and I'll continue after.
As much as anything else, I just want to do a sound check to make sure people actually can hear me here, because we've had a couple of people saying they couldn't. So, broadly speaking, when we're talking about the Appassimento method, we start with pasito grapes, or dried grapes, which they used for the big daddy here at 14.5% alcohol, and they dry the grapes down. We'll talk about the exact percentage of water loss that you're talking about with this. But after that wine is actually made, you actually have quite a bit of leftover marks. So you can't press it anymore, or else you're going to introduce bitterness. You could introduce all sorts of off flavors when you press it. But you've got all this really expensive dried grape juice sitting in this big sodden mass, and you really can't press it out. So what do you do with it? You take a non-grape wine and you pour it over the top, or pass it through, and you basically, just through osmosis effectively, kind of pull that more expensive juice out of the dried grape solids that you can't get any other way. And as a result, you end up with a wine that's not quite fresh juice, not quite dried grape juice. It's a little bit of both, and it's now again, there's a huge disparity in quality, because you can have 1% dried fruit to 99%, or you can have 50-50, you can have any percentage you want. So there's a big disparity in Ripasso style wines. It takes a really, really deft hand to actually make them, and to make them very, very well. So I always find it interesting when people make them, because there's so many different ways you can do it. You can go a very small amount of dried grape just to bring up the complexity of a fairly simple wine, or you can really just go for it, and you're really just adding a little bit of fresh wine to pull out some of those really big flavors from the dried berry wine. So what's your philosophy on it, Daren?
So, well explained. My method is that, as you mentioned, we actually retain the big daddy component, which is the skins that have been lightly pressed. I'll actually pump those into a tank, and then we'll actually drop our Shiraz on top. So it'll be a combination of ferment from those skins that'll actually build colour and depth and concentration and increase the alcohol as well. So I actually just leave it in stainless steel tanks for 4 to 6 months, I guess, and then we'll actually run that back through the press and give it another press. So I'm not too concerned about bitterness and phenolics. I think it actually adds to the style. I think it also depends on what type of press you use as well. We're using a pneumatic membrane press, which is one of the most delicate presses that you can use. So that's all part of the methodology, I guess, with our particular wines. So we're really just lifting and amping up something that was already a good wine, but just taking it to the next level to create the second pass Shiraz.
You mentioned with your Pinot Grigio your canopy management, where you basically wanted to provide shade. With the Passamento and the dried grape Shiraz, I'm gathering that you actually want a higher level of alcohol. You want a little more richness in the grapes, so different canopy management?
In a sense, remembering that in this part of the world, we have plenty of sun, we have very little rainfall during the harvest period. Most summer days are 35 degrees Celsius up to 38 degrees Celsius. So by default, the canopy, the leaves are actually shutting down anyway when it gets to those temperatures. So we do, dappled light is still very important. But yes, there's a little bit more exposure in the Shiraz, yes, but similar-ish type canopy, just a little bit less shading. And we have no issues with achieving, optimum ripeness and concentration and alcohol content because of the environment that the Shiraz is going to. So.
Deirdre, I'm going to just correct something I probably misspoke on. I'm going to answer Deirdre's question here about non-grape wine being poured over. What I meant was non-dried grape wine. So when, in the context of the second pass here, we are starting with two different wines, or two different, I guess at this point, musts. So you've got the juice that's coming from the dried grapes, and then you've got some fresh wine, some non-dried grape wine that's just, really nice ripe Shiraz that's been crushed, left on the skins to turn a darker color and to pick up all the flavors out of the skins, and then it's added in to blend with the dried grape to maximize the use of the dried grape juice. So it's not just young fresh crush wine, it's not just dried grape wine, it's a blend of both, and you're passing it over the leftover mark, or there's a nicer word than mark, I can't remember what it is for that.
You could call it must, I guess.
Must, yeah, okay. And then you have the dried grape. It's not left, and you can correct me on this one if I'm wrong here, but I would assume, at least in Italy, they're not dried on the vine. They are they're actually dried in baskets. So
in Italy, yes, and I have a couple of methods of achieving, I guess, the concentration. So. In Australia, yes, one method is to leave it dry on the vine. I also am fortunate enough to have access to a prune drying house. So that method is also used in Italy as well. So we'll actually harvest it, put it on trays and racks, and then it will go through a cycle in a large prune drying house ahead of winemaking.
Now I'm going to use that as a nice segue to start talking about the dried grape Shiraz. Now, my first introductions to dried grape Shiraz, they were things like Matola Savitar, which I've got kind of sitting behind me, and that sells for about $58-60. This sells for under 30 here. So how are you doing a dried grape Shiraz for half the price of the other folks here?
I'll just say that I'm in winemaking, and I let the capable accountants and the Matthew Nugan, the owner of the company, worry about those things. Do I think it's worth that price? No, I don't. I think it's our customers are being spoiled at that price point. There's little money at all in this. We don't make a lot of it either. It was as I said initially. more about experimentation and showing our clients what we could do. So let's just say we're not doing it for the money.
All right,
okay.
Fair enough. Then I'll segue it into another thing. You did this to do something for the Danish market. It was something that they asked for. Was it a success for them in Denmark? Did it work for them?
The answer is yes. We still continue to do it. Half the production will go there, and the balance will actually come to you guys. We do it a small amount for the domestic market, but honestly, this is not large volume wine for us. For this wine, it'll be possibly about 30,000 litres, which is definitely on the smaller end of the spectrum for us. So, is it a success? It's still ticking along, and it's definitely an important part of the Nugan Estate portfolio. So yes, we'll continue to make this, and I enjoy making it.
Nice. I'll ask you this question. So you talked about this not being your biggest series. At least for us, we get the Nugan third generation, we get the Cucathama, we get the single vineyard series. We used to get Wally's Hut. We get the Alfredo series. What's your biggest selling line for you? And is it different for export versus in Australia?
Yes. So the answer is, well, firstly, most of what I do is destined for the export market. The domestic market is approximately 7% of what we do here. So the answer to the question is quite different. But broad brush stroke, third generation Chardonnay and Shiraz would be our largest volume wines. Domestically, we have different products, so it would more be probably the Cucathama products that you can see behind me, Shiraz and Chardonnay, and we do a McLaren Val Shiraz, so a Nugan Estate McLaren Val Shiraz, Coonawarra Cabernet, and the Chardonnay from King Valley. They'd be up there with our biggest sellers at the moment. So the single vineyard wines are up there with our largest sales. Yeah.
I think that's really funny because here, the Canadian wine scene doesn't really have much of an export presence. If you went to your corner wine shop, could you find a Canadian wine that wasn't a nice wine? Like even if you were trying and really hated yourself and were willing to pay too much for it?
To be honest, I live in a small country town. I would have to go to a capital city, to find Canadian wine. That's the truth. So it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think about 85% of our production right now is actually domestically consumed. So to hear something like 7% domestic consumption is kind of shocking to me. You had a question?
Do you just have the one winery, or do you ferment in several different places? Because McLaren Vale to Riverina those are long distances, and I would be surprised that you were shipping grapes that far.
Okay, so during the harvest period, I don't get a lot of sleep. So the answer is that I travel thousands of kilometres to get across all of those vineyards and sign them off. So the answer is yes and no. For the wines that come from King Valley, which is northeast Victoria, which is actually south of where we are at the moment, about 3.5 hours south of here, by law, we actually have to have the product juiced, so contract pressed and juiced. It's actually a phylloxera area, and a large part of Australia, in fact New South Wales, the state that I'm in now, the vines are on own roots and they're phylloxera-free zones. So I don't want to be the guy that brings phylloxera to our region and destroys our vast amount of vineyards on own roots. So by law, we harvest, crush and press in Victoria. and bring clarified juice back for fermentation to the winery. So it's chilled down to about 3 degrees Celsius, and then we'll bring it back here for fermentation. The only red that I make in northeast Victoria, in King Valley, is a Sangiovese, and we do that small batch winemaking down there. So I'll have a team that I work with that they pretty much follow my instruction, and I just do a lot of driving back and forth to the winery to ensure that we achieve what it is that we have to achieve, and then once the Sangiovese is pressed out, then I'll bring it back for maturation in barrels and stainless steel and malolactic fermentation and the like. Now Coonawarra, McLaren Vale, Langhorne Creek, Rattonbully, they're all regions in South Australia, and yes, they're 800 kilometres from the winery. Right. But with mechanisation and careful monitoring, the answer is that I will start harvest at about 9 to 10 p.m. at night, and they will harvest to the early hours of the morning, and then pretty much by mid-afternoon, early evening the next day, I will have the fruit and we'll process that. So Coonawarra in South Australia has maritime conditions and has very cool overnight breezes. So when in fact I receive that fruit, you can put your hand into the bin and it feels like it's just come out of the refrigerator. It's super cool, and I guess of sorts it's almost like a cold soak, the trip back. But if I was concerned about the condition of the fruit, the answer is no. I wouldn't bring it back. I would. I've dealt with wineries in the particular regions, and I would spend my time down there, and we'd make the wines there before bringing them back. So for primary ferment the wines. So just remember, it's different parts of Australia with different climates, so it doesn't all happen at once. The wines such as the Pinot Grigio, I will pick those grapes late January to early February, whereas the South Australian wines, reds, normally it's mid to late March into April. So we've got months, and it works out quite well. It's staggered quite well. King Valley is normally the second week of February to the second week of March. So I literally just move from area to area, and that's how it works.
Gives you good use of your fermentation tanks.
Yeah, we've got more than enough. I'm fortunate enough to have basically a brand new winery that could handle anything that could be thrown at it. So even if we had a super, I guess, hot vintage and we had to bring everything in very quickly, we've got more than enough capacity to be able to do that. We've got ample refrigeration. It's just a really good setup. I'm blessed to be able to have this facility here to work with. And I've been in the industry for quite a few years and have some very good friends that would help me out if we needed to use their facility, if we're in a bit of a bind, not being able to shift fruit back to the winery for processing.
I had a really interesting question. We've had people from all over the wine industry over the last 14 weeks. We've had winemakers from North America, South America, Australia. We actually have some folks from Europe joining us at the end of July here. But I think you have to be our largest wine concern that we've actually worked with. And the question we had here was, what's a small batch for you? Because when you were talking about 30,000 liters, I think for some of the winemakers that we've worked with, it's been like 30,000 liters is a pipe dream. Like that's nothing for them. Why don't we talk about your operations of scale? It's not something that, at least for our little channel, 14 weeks in so far, that we've seen yet. Why don't you talk about the scale that you're working on?
Sure, not a problem. So my scale can be as small or almost as large as it needs to be. So we'll do small batch ferments of 2 tons if required. So we'll definitely hand plunge some of our South Australian fruit. They'll be in 2-ton open fermenters. We've got the option of basket pressing, so traditional basket pressing up to 2 different sizes of air membrane pressing. And then we can go right up to 140-ton fermenters. So that's 10,000 cases in one fermenter.
It's just a staggering amount of wine.
So remembering that it's still probably single vineyard. There's myself, another winemaker, and just a handful of cellar hands, and it's all handmade. So we're just upsizing the scale. So we're definitely not a refinery. Right now I have 2 cellar hands, and there's 2 winemakers. There's 4 of us making wine for Australia and the world. We've got a really good facility here, and we can do a lot with a little. I've got one lady that does laboratory work. I've got one man that's in maintenance. We've got a lady that does social media. So we're big, but we're small in that regard. So everyone knows their job. I've been working with most of these guys for over a decade, some almost 2 decades. So we get in and get it done.
Beautiful. So I'm going to step in here for just a moment. I'm going to talk about what we've got coming up for wine tastings next week. Now, folks, we've only got one more wine to go, so we've probably only got Daren for just a little while longer. So if you've got questions, please get them in for us. So let us talk about our beer tasting coming up this Wednesday night. This Wednesday is, of course, Canada Day, so it's a holiday for everybody, and I expect that everybody is going to be needing a little bit of pre-gaming. So we're going to get you into your pre-gaming by doing some really light, sessionable, 100% Canadian beers. So we are doing bitters and milds in sessions. So down at the extreme low alcohol level, we've got Blind Man's Super Session. They're actually doing 100% of the proceeds from these cans are actually going to CKUA this year for independent radio in the province of Alberta, so that's really cool. It's a 3% super can at 568 mils, dry hopped all to heck, so it's kind of like a big IPA with no alcohol. From OT Brewing, we've got the 180 English Pub Ale, which they're not calling a bitter, but is absolutely a bitter. If I have the guy from OT on and he says it's not, don't tell him I said that, but we are doing that beer. And then we're going to do the American Mild, also down at like 4.3%. And just about the cheapest 4-pack going. I think we're selling these to the princely sum of $8.95 for 4 cans. So super cool beer, and we'll talk about the process of making a second runnings beer. And then finally, as recommended by Daren actually at Spectrum Brewing here in town, the Endeavour Express ESB, which is maybe a shade high in alcohol for an extra special bitter at 5.4, but it tastes right and it does all the things I want it to. So we're not going to hold the alcohol against it. For winemaking next week, we are joined by 2 gentlemen actually. And if you thought we had technical difficulties having one person live and one person in video, well, wait till next week. No. Aaron feels bad enough. I guarantee it's going to be seamless next week. And if it's not, he's going to be in so much trouble. So we've been talking all summer about Chris Brockway of Brock Cellars and his Love series of wines. So we'll be doing the Love Rosé and the Love Red, both based in the Valdegay grape variety. It was actually at this winery back, actually almost exactly a year ago. It was in California. It was in July last year when I was staying in San Luis Obispo. So these are really, really nice wines. In particular, I love the Rosé. The Brock Cellars Love Red was actually one of our best-selling wines, if not our very best-selling wine last year. But I like the Rosé. It's kind of hot and dry outside. Now, Dad, I'm going to ask you a question about this. This is Italian. It's Moscato. It's sparkling. Is it going to be sweet?
It should be.
It's not. It's bone dry. So we've got a super antithetical bone dry, like sparkling Moscato. And it is also not from Asti. It's not from Piemonte. It's actually from Veneto. So the other corner of northern Italy. Done kind of as a pet nat style. Nice and cloudy, so it's got a whole bunch of yeast sediment in there. So that's going to be really fun. Only 3 wines, $80 to the tasting, same as this week. I want to thank, actually, Nugan and the representatives here in Alberta, they actually had. We couldn't normally fit this in on an $80 budget for these 4 wines, but they actually put everything except the Durif on sale, so we could actually fit all this in. So it ended up being really, really nice. So thank you to Brad and Kayla at Southern Glazers for setting all that up and making this work so that we could actually get all 4 wines on budget. So it's going to be fun. So we have some questions already pouring in here. So we will. Let's get some questions, because I still have quite a bit of dried grape Shiraz, and then we will. Hello, Hand. The dried grape, eh? All right, you can have it, but not Aaron.
All right.
So, all right, let us go through this. So, Elizabeth wants to know, how did Nugan fare with all the Australian fires? Did you guys lose a bunch of vineyard? Did you have to throw out a whole bunch of grapes because they got like ash on them and the wines would have tasted too smoky? Because we certainly saw that with some fires in the Okanagan a couple, 3 years ago.
Okay, that's a really good question. So it's a region by region answer. Fortunately, the Riverina, which is where the Annelise wine and the Alfredo wines come from, and third generation wines, we were fine. We were avoided bushfires. We avoided smoke taint. So it's actually not the ash that causes the taint. The fruit itself actually brings the smoke in through the leaves, and normally it's stored in the sugars. And when you'll taste the fruit, and you won't actually taste ashy fruit. It'll just taste like grapes. But once you ferment those sugars, that smoke is released. The glycol and glycosides are released into the wine and produce a smoke-tainted character. So there's been a lot of science done over the last couple of decades, and we worked very closely at Nugan Estate, but many other wineries worked very closely with the Australian Wine Research Institute in Adelaide, and they're front runners for smoke taint and smoke taint analysis worldwide. So there's a lot of work that has to be undertaken to ensure that we're not going to harvest this. We're going to harvest this fruit and not have a smoke tainted wine. So the answer is, in other regions such as the King Valley, there was bushfires there. Did we lose any vineyards? No, we didn't. But we didn't harvest some of the fruit because after laboratory analysis and also small batch fermentation and sensory analysis, I rejected the fruit, unfortunately, which was just devastating. So
that actually nicely does dovetail with my next question.
Sure.
One of the things you mentioned when you were first introducing Nugan wines was that you were the 13th largest producer of privately labeled wines, as in you grow it, you make it, you do it, or at absolute worst, sometimes you buy some grapes. When you say you reject some grapes, they don't just, you don't just truck them off to the dumpster or anything. You actually sell them on. What do you do? Like, what do you look for when you actually decide to make that decision to, sell grapes on? And can you talk a little bit about the, especially here, we see a lot of kind of bulk wines out of Australia, especially these days, and having like a premium label like yours that's, family-owned, estate-made. It's actually interesting. Talk a little bit about just how big kind of the bulk wine industry and the by contract wine industry is out of Australia.
Yeah. So let's just. But before we go too far, the answer is that not all grapes are harvested to make wine. There are some vineyards, after analysis, it doesn't matter what you do to the process, they will only make smoke-tainted wines. So there's a heart-wrenching decision that has to be made that that fruit will be left and will bring in cattle, animals, and that fruit will be eaten because we're unable to make wine out of it. Fortunately, it's a very rare occasion that we'll have a bushfire during the harvest period. But the answer is, if it isn't going to make the grade, then we aren't going to make the wine. So some of it can be harvested and evaporated and made into grape juice concentrate. But as I said, some of it just we can't use it at all.
And that's a tragedy.
And it's a loss. It's a huge loss for us. There are some government subsidies at the moment. As I said, fortunately, it was just the one vintage that we lost, but plenty of my colleagues have lost entire vineyards that were just burnt out, that have been in their family for a long time, and they have to start again. So we've been very fortunate to avoid all of that, but much more lucky than some.
That's wonderful for you. I'm really pleased to hear that. Let's move on just into the Durif here, because I really like this one. This was, bizarrely enough, the very first time I was pitched Nugan Estate. I'm pretty sure I was pitched the Manuka Grove Durif and Wally's Hut Chardonnay in the same meeting, and absolutely nothing else.
Interesting. Okay,
this was not with Southern Glazers. I think this was with PMA back in the day. But yes, as I remember the meeting, that was what I was sold. And I bought both for what it's worth.
Thank you. They're obviously very different. So Manuka Grove is the name of the vineyard that the current owner, Matthew Nugan, so his mother, lives on that vineyard. The Durif was planted on the vineyard because Matthew's father, Ken, loved his Durifs. So not very common, a variety, but in an area called Rutherglen, which is in Victoria, not far from here, so on the way to King Valley, in fact. They've made some very famous Durifs that Ken fell in love with and thought, well, there's similar growing conditions in the Riverina as there are in Rutherglen, so they planted Durif on that vineyard. And when I first started making it, traditionally Durifs have been quite muscular, powerful, full-flavoured, highly alcoholic, heavily oaked style wines, and I'll admit that that's where I first started making. That was the style that I was, I guess, trying to achieve. Over time, as I've aged, I think my thoughts about that have changed a lot. So we're making more of a medium-bodied, more approachable, fruit-forward style wine. I've dialed the oak right back, just more user-friendly. We're also giving it some bottle age as well. So I'm pretty sure you guys have got the 2016 vintage.
We do.
That's actually the current release here in Australia as well. But we've bottled the 2017 and we're about to bottle the 18. So we give it some bottle age. So everything is tempered. The tannins are tempered, but it's still a Durif. So full flavoured, concentrated, that sort of darker roast, coffee.
Definitely coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, red fruit, earth, those sort of notes. That's what we have here. We call it our carnivals wine. So for me, just getting some, a ribeye, a big thickly cut steak, and cooking that over coals, and having a large chalice of this in the winter time. And it's winter here at the moment, so it was about 3 degrees Celsius this morning, and we'll have something like that overnight. Here, which is nothing for you Canadians, but it's pretty cold for us Aussies.
Hey, it was, what's it right this minute? It's 27 degrees Celsius outside. That's the height of summer. That's hot enough to strip paint off the walls here.
Goodness, yeah, that it can be that some mornings when I get out of bed in summer. So, but as I said, for me, it's the perfect. We call it campfire, but bonfire, outside fire bucket sort of style wine, but also, with a large, appropriately sized piece of cow, probably cooked rare. I think it's as good as it gets.
I think if you're cooking it any other way, you're cooking it wrong.
So the last time I was in Riverina, it was about 44 Celsius. How do you keep any acidity in this wine? Because I mean, it's beautifully balanced.
That would have to be a near record.
It was more.
That'd have to be around 2008 or something. I would have thought. It's maybe not, but we may have the odd day that we'll have that. But how do we keep acidity?
Yeah.
Once again, it's about canopy management and keeping that fruit protected as well. So, and it's when you pick it. I was very much into just letting it, get a little bit of shrivel on it back in the day to produce more, alcoholic styles with glycerol and that sort of thing. And the acids were on the lower side, but now we've got different blocks, so I'll pick them. I'll do a bit of a mix and match. So some I'll be looking for, I guess, different types of flavors, and then others there'll be, I guess, a less ripe flavor, still ripe, but with higher acid retention. So we've got different. Some have rootstocks, some are on own roots, and they all behave differently. So that's where the science, well, I guess, and the art of blending comes in to be able to produce a full-flavored, balanced wine with acidity that's in check.
Awesome. I've actually built up about a half dozen questions here that I want to get through here. Now, Durif, that's a grape that is not super common there. It's not super common internationally, but they grow quite a bit in California. Is it genetically identical to what the Calis call Petite Syrah?
Yes, it is, and I've actually made it in California as well. So I spent a little bit of time over there just observing how they handled their fruits. So I was fortunate enough to have a vintage over there.
Where did you do your vintage in California?
So I actually spent a little bit of time with at Bonterra and Sonoma, not Sonoma, the Fetzer group, so Sonoma, Cotrea, and Bonterra and the like. So that was an interesting, I guess, introduction. I've used that information as well as some Australian methods to put together what we have today.
Have you done a lot of work around the world, or has it been? Where all have you worked? What would people? What place where you have where it kind of had the biggest influence on you? Then let's put it that way.
I mean, I've been to France, so Bordeaux. Influence. I mean, I'm not sure. I've really always tried to do my own thing. I just like to take other people's ideas possibly and use them as a stepping stone. I couldn't say. I guess being very much a different growing environment in Australia as well, it's about mastering the environment here and as I said, and then for me putting my own spin on that. Do we benchmark against international ones? Of course we do, but for me, I don't want to emulate anyone. I want to make something unique and handmade. That's what we're trying to do here.
Now you mentioned, you used to let the grapes hang on the vine until they were actually a little bit wrinkled, and you're now not doing that so much. You've kind of changed the style of the wine over time to do something different with it. We've noticed, at least for our store, that people are maybe moving away from some of those very high alcohol, very heavily oaked wines, which is to a certain point what Australia is known for. How are you as an Australian winemaker adjusting to a world that seems to be drinking lower and lower alcohol wines, maybe a little drier wines, a little lighter wines, a little less oaky wines? What are you doing and how are you adjusting? Or are you just saying, no, this is what we do and we're not going to apologize for it and the world will come back around to this style?
That actually works perfectly for me because I actually prefer having more medium-bodied food-friendly styles. As I've been doing this over the years, not really concerned what others are doing, but for me, as far as winemaking is concerned, even if we just want to go Durif, there's been changes at all levels. But if we just speak about the Durif, as I said, I used to pick it a little bit later. There'd be a little bit more shrivel in the fruit, so you'd get more of those sort of portier characteristics. Dial that back a little bit, you get more red fruit. I really used to work the skins in ferment, so macerate the hell out of them to make these big, dense, ballsy, gutsy, mouthful of sand sort of tannin-like wines with the alcohol and the new American oak barrels on top. So it was just loading it up, and it was, just fatigued me. Fatigued the palate. They just weren't enjoyable wines.
And I think it's fatigued the global palate, because we've seen just a shift, and I love to hear that you're responding to it, and that your wines are going to be shifting with the global palate, because I want to keep selling your wines. I want it to be just this change in style, and I love that you're so in touch with it and so in tune with how things are changing that it fits more with your own personal winemaking philosophy.
Thank you. So these days, a lot of whole berry, during ferment, and that promotes red fruit forwardness. It promotes fleshiness and plushness. I use rotary fermenters or vinomatics instead of the old pump over system to macerate. So really, it's one of the most delicate ways of macerating, and I'll just do it a couple of times a day. So you literally just press a button and the tank turns slightly, and it's really just shifting the skins around a little bit to pick up colour. Now Durif has abundant colour, and it has a lot of seeds as well, so it has abundant tannin. So you really need to know how to deal with that particular variety, otherwise you end up with just big blockbusters. So less is more. Work the skins less, and you'll end up with a more user-friendly, medium-bodied style wine. We'll drop it into bag press, so we don't really work too much on extended maceration or post-ferment maceration anymore. Just nice cool ferment, locking in all of those flavours and aromatics, keep the maceration to a minimum, a gentle bag press, drain off into stainless steel and older barrels, and then blend the two accordingly. So it's almost the opposite of how I used to make it when I started doing this in making Durif in 2001.
Wow. You and I started basically the same time with that then. I'm going to ask there a couple of questions here really quickly. Craig, it's not just a matter of berry size. Petite Syrah and Syrah are actually unrelated grapes, or at least they're very distantly related. I don't know my ampelography. It's just one of those things like Alicante Bouchette is called Garnacha Tintorera. Is it a strain of Grenache? No, it's not. It's a local name for it because it kind of looked like Grenache. And Petite Syrah, to the person who named it, looked like a small-berried version of Syrah, so they named it Petite Syrah. It's not related. It's not just a small-berried variant. It's just, a historical artifact name. If you want to go through the number of things that are called Riesling over the years, we'd be here all night. The next question is actually kind of a funny one. I kind of feel bad bringing it up. It was kind of a historical thing, but people want to know where Wally's Hut came from, why you don't call it that anymore.
Okay, so Wally's Hut is actually a place. It's actually the name of a small hut, or drover's hut. We actually also have a drover's hut brand.
Okay,
but
I've got to ask, what is a drover? Because I keep seeing the name on Australian wine labels, but I have no idea what a drover is.
So a drover is basically a shepherd. Of sorts. So they'll tend to the sheep and the cattle. They're cowboys of sorts, and basically they'll be boundary riders. So remembering a lot of these properties in Australia are quite vast. So you'll have kilometres and kilometres of fences that keep foxes and pests out, but keep your livestock in. So they maintain that. They tend to the animals. It's that type of thing. So this was just one of the huts on the Cookatharma property, and it still stands today, Wally's hut. And we've actually had a few Canadian guests and some international guests come, and they were fortunate enough to go and see Wally's hut. But that's where the name came from. It's on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River, and it's a little bit more flash than it was back in the day. So we cook up a few steaks out there and have a few glasses of wine with our guests and enjoy life.
Reminisce when you could buy a litre and a half of Wally's Hut for $13.95 in the Chardonnay 15 years ago. I do want to ask an actually interesting question, just because one of the things that's happened here in Canada with COVID is beef prices is spiked. Like, you got to take out a second mortgage to buy a steak. Is it the same thing there? Are beef prices absolutely insane in Australia as well, or has that not been a thing that you now? Fine, it's just here.
No, we've had some. Just lost focus. Apologies for that.
No, that's all right. Aaron says if you sat half a foot closer to the camera, it would have an easier time focusing. I didn't want to bring it up because we've had enough bloody tech problems tonight. There we go. Yep. Apparently that did work.
I'm actually half a foot from the camera, but anyway. Okay, the beef. Yeah, we've actually, after the horrendous bushfires, we've actually had plenty of beautiful rain. So a lot of that scorched countryside is now green, and it's been the perfect growing conditions for our cattle farmers, sheep farmers, our cereal crop farmers. So everything's looking beautiful in Australia, and honestly, beef's actually, it's as cheap as. I mean, I'm not sure what you call expensive. I'm for a ribeye. For a good ribeye, I'm looking at paying about $25 to $30 Australian a kilo. I'm not sure.
We'd be paying almost that a steak.
Yeah, we'd be paying $25, $30 Canadian per pound right now. So we're double what you are, mind you.
Yeah, pretty much.
We also
That's unfortunate.
We had our two largest beef packing plants basically shut down because of the coronavirus, and those two plants supply 70% of all the beef in Canada. That's ouch.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a year. You were going to get steaks for Father's Day. You got wine instead.
I got wine instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thankfully no issue with the red meats. Toilet paper, on the other hand, goodness me.
Yeah, no, that's a global thing.
Yeah, they've gone crazy. So, yeah, we're still struggling. It's just ridiculous to actually secure toilet paper. We're having a second resurgence of that. I've just heard that even our small country town is the shelves are bare again, which is ridiculous. I mean, we have
toilet paper's not an issue here. Actually, it's fine now.
It was.
Okay.
Was. Well, we're going to get second wave eventually here, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we've just had the second wave in the last couple of days. Anyway, it is what it is. Interesting times that we live in.
Interesting times. Let's get back to wine, because wine's more fun.
Sure, yeah.
So what do you have coming out that's kind of new and exciting? What are we going to see here that's new from Nugan Estates? What's up and coming that we should be really excited about?
I'm always doing new things, and to be honest, I probably need some sales and marketing people sitting alongside me. I could probably just talk about what I'm doing new and exciting in the winery. Yeah, unfortunately, being Saturday morning, it's just myself and the lovely Cass.
I can see that like a couple of the people who represent your wines in Alberta are watching. So no, let's put some heat on those bastards.
Let's do that.
Hi, Brad. No, go ahead. Let's see what you've got exciting. Let's build some hype.
What have you got?
Are we talking about me? Yeah, we're not talking to Brad now. Okay.
No, we're talking about like what have you got coming that you're excited about coming out of the winery. If we see it or not, I want to hear what you're excited about, because I like talking about wine in general terms with people who are interested in wine. If we get it, amazing. If we don't, whatever. Yeah. But let's talk about what you're excited about. Let's talk about what you've got going in the winery.
Perfect. So we're doing some interesting blends at the moment. We have for a little while with some Zinfandel from Langhorne Creek, which is also South Australia. Now, once again, probably another carnivore's wine, and I had a little bit of a play around with this in the States, but I've put my own spin on it. So we actually do a Zinfandel Durif blend, which we call which we call a Bruta. And it's got a picture of a bull on the front, and we talk about pretty much having a massive steak with a massive glass of La Bruta, and we talk about concentration and flavour. This one has a little bit more tannin and a little bit more new oak, so we haven't completely wiped that section out of our repertoire, but just made it a little bit more user friendly, and I really like it. And our straight Zinfandel, it's probably been made more in that Primitivo style, so we're a little bit more user friendly, a little bit more fruit friendly, food friendly, I should say. Stainless steel with a small amount of older barrels in there as well. That excites me. Sangiovese out of King Valley. So Sangiovese is northeast Victoria, so high country Victoria. As discussed, it actually snows in that vineyard. There's a lot of Italian varietals down there. We've got a really good site down there, and we've got a Brunello clone. So we're making these, deeply concentrated styles of Sangiovese, but I've dialed back the maceration, so you've got fleshiness and vibrancy and acidity, and just a little bit of oak. So I just love that wine with with some pizza and pasta. Fire up the wood-fired pizza and grab a glass of that, and that's fantastic. I love it. Doing some different things with Chardonnays, for example, playing around with new strains. There's a big thing about going back to. There's a bit of a directional change going back to old school, as in wild fermentation and solids and that sort of thing. Rather than
I would have expected that your Chardonnays, based on how spicy they were, would have been at least some wild ferment from the beginning. But we've definitely seen a push towards wild ferment these days. And I can't wait to see what you're doing with wild ferment, because I consider you a hell of a Chardonnay maker.
The answer is yes and no. What we've been doing, and thank you. What we've been doing is using multiple strains of non-Saccharomyces yeast. So your traditional wine yeast or winemaking yeast and baker's yeast, being Saccharomyces cerevisiae. We've actually we're working with a Danish company with a multi-strained non-sac yeast that actually emulates wild fermentation, but in a controlled environment. So you're getting that sort of struck flint, nutty, cashewy, funky sort of style Chardonnay, but it's controlled. The issue sometimes with wild ferments is they have a tendency to become attenuated and stuck and don't complete fermentation. So these strains have been selected to give all of the attributes of a wild fermentation, but give you a finished ferment as well, which is really exciting. And I'm using some modern strains as well, just to build layers and complexity. There's just so many things that can be done. My lab is a science lab. Many different experiments going on with different types of different suppliers with oak barrels and barrel staves and tannins, and it never ends. I just love what I do. It's never the same thing every day, and that's why I'm still here after such a long time. A lot of winemakers would sort of up and move on to something new, but I deal with fruit that can be hundreds of kilometers apart from different regions, from hot climate to cool climate to in between to Italian varietals to mainstream varietals, making different styles for different countries. It's exciting. I'm excited to do it. That's why
I'm excited to have potentially you back again, because I think this was a ton of fun and I really appreciate your time. We promised that we wouldn't keep you later than quarter past the hour. It's now 28 past. Thank you very much for bearing with us. I really, really, really appreciate this. What time is it there right now, by the way? It'd be what, 11:15, 11:30?
It's 28. It's almost 11:30 in the morning, Saturday.
So you're almost ready for lunch.
Almost. I'll take this glass of Durif with me, maybe.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. Daren, I've already got a perhaps future project in mind for something we might be able to do together. I really appreciate you taking the time with us. This was absolutely a delight. We're getting comments like, Nugan Estate has 2 new customers, absolutely adored this. This gives me a new perspective on Australian wine. It's been absolutely nothing but love, mate, and I really appreciate you coming out and spending the evening with us. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you very much, Daren. We'll talk to you, I hope, very soon, and maybe we'll do something about those Chardonnays I love so much.
Sure. Could be a plan.
That could be a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Daren. We will say goodnight. Dad, let's talk about what you liked tonight. What was your favorite wines? You are the store's Australian expert and the store's Australian fan.
I really think this dried grape Shiraz is just a miracle.
Why?
Because it's got balance and it's got acidity, and yet it's got an elegance to it that is just unusual.
All right. What do you think of the Durif?
Love the Durif.
Yeah?
Yeah. Durif is well done. It's Petit Syrah can be very clunky.
Yes, it certainly can.
And this is not clunky. This is elegant. It's sophisticated. It's a well done wine.
Awesome. Well, we will be around for text questions and text comments down in the comments section, as always, in Facebook, and we will get back to you folks on Wednesday for the upcoming beer tastings, Sessions, Bitters, and Milds. That's Canada Day, July 1st at 6 o'clock, and we'll see you all there. For those of you non-beer drinkers, we will see you July 3rd for our 2 Brock Sellers Love Wines, and we will see you for that dry, sparkling Italian Moscato. So, yeah. Thank you again, Daren. Thank you, Dad. Thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. We will be here. Thank you all so much again. We'll see you in a week. Thank you very much and goodbye.